What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Who was Nostradamus and why do his predictions still rile us up? Long before TikTok theories, Nostradamus captivated Europe with his eerily accurate predictions. Here's the history of the plague doctor whose life was as interesting as his prophecies. What's in the future and how does the world end? They're tempting questions and one that, centuries ago, doctor and self-styled prophet Nostradamus always claimed to answer. His famed predictions range from confusing to creepy, and his acolytes believe his 16th-century predictions still ring true today. His supposed 2025 prophecies include long wars, plague, and a fireball that may destroy Earth. In point of fact, Nostradamus is so well known for his predictions that the word prognostication first appears in English in a reference to him in 1672. However, the man who is regarded as a prophet was not a divine being. He was a real-life French physician, apothecary, and author whose bold predictions earned him a name in the tumult of Renaissance Europe. Here's what to know about Michel de Nostradamus, better known as Nostradamus. Who or what was Nostradamus? Michel de Nostradamus was born in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, France, in December 1503. The exact date is not agreed upon by historians. The son of a notary and the daughter of a prominent local physician were his parents. Nostradamus would marry twice during his lifetime, ultimately fathering 8 children. During Nostradamus' lifetime, Renaissance France and the rest of Europe were beset by religious strife, which had significant repercussions for the young Nostradamus. His family was Jewish but had converted to Catholicism after Provence became part of the Kingdom of France in 1486. Though Jews had a long history in the region, they were told by local authorities in the late 1400s to either convert or be expelled, so Michel was raised Catholic. Young Nostradamus studied Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and medicine and began attending the University of Avignon while still a teen. He received his bachelor's degree in medicine in the 1520s, though his school closed because of the bubonic plague while he was a student. Plague doctor and Inquisition. Nostradamus traveled through France after completing his formal education to study herbalism and treat plague victims, one of the most feared diseases of the time. According to historians, he was kicked out of the University of Montpellier, where he went on to study, for practicing the manual trade of an apothecary. However, they disagree on whether he went back to earn his full doctorate. Practicing medicine in Renaissance France meant treating diseases like plague. But the era's medicine also involved practices now deemed unscientific, like alchemy, astrology, and prophecy. The name of Nostradamus's wife and his 2 children were not spared by these practices. They likely died of plague in the 1530s. The devastated doctor now faced other problems too. He was accused of heresy and brought before inquisitors in 1538 after he was overheard harshly praising the craftsmanship of a religious statue. A heresy accusation would have destroyed his reputation locally, and a conviction would mean he was executed. However, he was cleared by the court, and he resumed his travels with a focus on plague medicine. Since he found steady employment, it appears that some of Nostradamus' remedies were effective. It's likely that hygienic practices like recommending clean drinking water were the key to the success of some of his treatments. Others, like his rose pills, used herbs and flowers. Alchemy, astrology, and other esoteric practices that are now considered to be unscientific were also part of his practice. But his patients were satisfied enough with the results to spread the word about his skill. In the decade that followed, the doctor's treatments for the plague took him all over France, and his writing and work began to attract admirers in high places, scientific or not. Nostradamus' poetic predictions. The doctor and French astrologer, whose name was widely Latinized as Nostradamus, began writing annual almanacs in the 1550s that drew on his supposed knack for making accurate predictions on the events and weather conditions of the year to come. These cheap, popular publications became known for their poetic prognostications and introduced Nostradamus to a wider audience. Because of his fame, Nostradamus had a number of very important clients who were looking for personal and political predictions. In 1555, He predicted that a young lion thought to be code for the coat of arms of King Henry II of France would fall in combat, and the next year Henry's wife, Queen of France Catherine de' Medici, and her son Charles IX visited the prognosticator. When Henry II did indeed die on July 10, 1559 of an injury sustained during a jousting tournament, it sparked what historian Denis Cruzet called a sense of imminent catastrophe. Over time, the doctor's reputation and mystery were enhanced by his flowery, hazy language, which shielded him and the person at the center of the prophecy from mistakes, humiliation, and false accusations. As Oxford University historian Michel Pfeffer writes for The Conversation, astrology and prognostication were commonly practiced at the time and were especially popular among the elite. By that time, Europe was already beset by religious and social strife due to the Reformation's unleashing of Catholic and Protestant tensions, social inequalities stirring of unrest, and public rumors and prophecies. Many of these divisions would boil over into conflict, including civil war, during Nostradamus' lifetime. Criticized by Catholics and Protestants alike, Nostradamus stood by his prophecies, publishing a large book of them and continuing to release his popular almanacs even after being briefly imprisoned for publishing his work without the Church's permission. He died on July 1, 1566, likely of gout. The public and historians have disagreed about the thousands of predictions he made during his lifetime, which appear to have been confirmed ever since. What transpired in contrast to what Nostradamus predicted? Though Nostradamus' seeming prediction of the death of Henry II gained him fame during his lifetime, his name has persisted thanks to other prophecies some believe have been fulfilled. Perhaps the most astonishing of his predictions was his specific forecast around 1558 that the Senate Parliament of London will put their king to death. In 1649, exactly that happened. Charles I was beheaded for treason after a conflict with Parliament that ended up sparking civil war in England. This is a remarkable statement, as even skeptics must acknowledge, according to biographer Ian Wilson. In the same prophecy, Nostradamus predicted that London would be burned by fireballs in thrice 20 and 6. In 1666, a fire did occur in London, destroying huge swaths of the city. People of the era hadn't forgotten Nostradamus's prophecies, and they didn't stop looking for events that potentially fulfilled them in the years that followed. Fans of the far-seeing doctor have attributed everything from the French Revolution, a married couple who will result in tempest fire blood, the rise of Napoleon, an emperor who will cost the empire dear, and the rise of Hitler, the great enemy of all the human race, to Nostradamus. But just as many of his vague prognostications have not come true, and there is a long history of political and cultural figures reinterpreting and even misinterpreting Nostradamus to further their own goals. The leaders of the Third Reich were among those eager to make use of Nostradamus' predictions. Joseph Goebbels, a propagandist, used prophecies in his work to stoke doubt and garner support for the Nazi war effort. Nostradamus has also been invoked by extremist groups, serving as a way to transmit ideologies to others. Nostradamus is also credited with predicting the end of the world. However, that prophecy is yet to come true. He prophesied that in July 1999, from the sky will come a great king of terror. His prediction further fueled doomsday fears as concerns rose about how the supposed Y2K bug would affect computer systems. The French astronomer is still being interpreted, read, and studied by those with an interest in prophecy and prognostication. Nostradamus continues to astonish and perplex people more than 500 years after his death, and interest in his predictions persists. Prophecy continues to shape hopes and fears for the future of individuals, groups, states, and the whole world, writes historian Stephen Bowd in the Encyclopedia of Millennialism and Millennial Movements. After all, who doesn't want to know the future or think it's possible to see? Who was Nostradamus, and why do his predictions still rile us up? In an era centuries removed from our digital age, long before TikTok conspiracy theories, Reddit rabbit holes, and AI-driven simulations forecasting world events, there lived a man whose cryptic verses would capture imaginations for half a millennium: Nostradamus. The mysterious Michel de Nostradamus, who was born in December 1503 in the small Provençal town of Saint-Rémy de Provence, France, was far from the typical prophet. Not a cloaked mystic casting spells in candlelit chambers, but rather a university-educated physician and apothecary shaped by the turbulence, terror, and transformation of Renaissance Europe. During the plague, war, religious upheaval, and scientific awakening of the 16th century, his life coincided with some of the most violent, chaotic, and revolutionary times. Yet it was his penchant for peering into the future, however vaguely, that would etch his name permanently into Western cultural memory. Nostradamus, as he came to be known, was not a prophet in the biblical sense, but a man who merged science, pseudoscience, and poetic ambiguity into forecasts that have echoed ominously through centuries. We still get excited by his predictions because they refer to a desire that is timeless and primordial, to find meaning in madness, order in chaos, and a glimpse of the future in an uncertain world. Nostradamus was a man of contradictions, a rational doctor trained in medicine who also dabbled deeply in astrology, alchemy, and divination. Michel's early life was marked by both privilege and precarity because he was born into a Jewish family that had converted to Catholicism due to social and political pressure. His family's forced conversion in the aftermath of Provence's integration into the Kingdom of France in 1486 would have a profound impact on his worldview. He grew up at a time when tensions between religious groups simmered and sometimes exploded into violence. His spiritual explorations and awareness of persecution were likely influenced by this dual identity, which was rooted in Jewish tradition but appeared to be Catholic. Nostradamus was an exceptional student. He studied Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and mathematics. Later, he enrolled at the University of Avignon, but the university was forced to close due to a sudden outbreak of the bubonic plague, one of many that would follow him throughout his life. Undeterred, Nostradamus continued his studies elsewhere, eventually becoming a licensed physician. He became best known in his own time not for seeing the future but for battling the Black Death. Nostradamus traveled throughout France and Italy as a plague doctor, treating victims with a combination of herbal remedies, pre-modern hygiene practices, and what is now known as preventative medicine. Unlike many physicians of his era, he rejected the commonly used technique of bloodletting and instead advocated for clean air, fresh water, and the use of antiseptic agents like rose-based lozenges. These choices were surprisingly progressive for the 1500s and may have been one reason for his relative success. Still, he was haunted by tragedy. In the 1530s, his first wife and 2 young children probably died of plague. Their names have been lost to history, but their deaths marked a turning point in Nostradamus's life. Grappling with grief, he turned further inward and further esoteric. He faced the threat of the Inquisition in 1538 after being accused of heresy for a casual comment that disparaged a religious statue. Even though he made it out alive, the incident made him realize how thin the line was between science and magic, medicine and magic, in an age ruled by religious dogma. His encounters with institutional power and death only increased his interest in mystical traditions. Nostradamus began writing not only medical treatises but also poetic quatrains that would make him immortal after years of travel and reinventing himself. By the early 1550s, Nostradamus had begun publishing almanacs, popular annual publications that mixed astrology, weather predictions, and vague prophecies. They went over well. His prose was full of astrological metaphors and symbolism, and it was written in rhyming quatrains, frequently in Old French or Latin. In 1555, he released his most famous work, Les Prophecies, a collection of 942 poetic quatrains grouped into sets of 100 called centuries. Each stanza offered a snapshot of a future event, sometimes specific, often obscure. These prophecies drew on his knowledge of astrology and history, but also reflected the anxieties and apocalyptic fervor of his time. Europe during the Renaissance was ripe for prophecy. The religious order had been fractured by the Protestant Reformation, the Ottoman Empire was expanding westward, and the bubonic plague came back repeatedly like a gloomy metronome that was counting down to an inevitable end. Kings fell, wars raged, and people searched desperately for signs and symbols that could make sense of their suffering. Nostradamus gave them what they craved: not certainty, but suggestion; not clarity, but the hope that the future could be read like a cipher. What set Nostradamus apart was his masterful vagueness. He used layered metaphor and obscured language to shield himself from criticism while allowing endless reinterpretation. One famous example is his prophecy interpreted to predict the death of King Henry II of France. Written in 1555, it read, "The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage, 2 wounds made 1. Then he dies a cruel death." In 1559, Henry died from a jousting accident when a lance pierced his eye through his gilded helmet. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the public's imagination was set ablaze. The coincidence amazed even skeptical individuals. Royal attention followed. Queen Catherine de' Medici, a woman fascinated by the occult, summoned Nostradamus to court. He eventually became her son's counselor, King Charles IX. His association with the royal family further elevated his status and, paradoxically, protected him from religious critics who might have otherwise condemned him. Despite his growing fame, Nostradamus continued to be a polarizing figure. Religious authorities, both Protestant and Catholic, viewed his work with suspicion. He was briefly imprisoned for publishing without the Church's approval but was soon released. After all, his predictions paid off, and he was a well-known figure at the time. By the time of his death in 1566, likely from complications related to gout, Nostradamus had authored thousands of verses. His unique hybrid of both science and mysticism sealed his legacy, not only as a scientist but also as a mystic. 4 centuries afterward, his prophecies would be consulted during times of turmoil. In 1649, one of his quatrains predicted that the Senate of London would assassinate their king, a prediction that came true with Charles I's execution following the English Civil War. In 1666, another prediction about fireballs falling from the sky, and the destruction of a great city was linked to the Great Fire of London. His writings have been interpreted as foretelling the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, an emperor who will cost the empire dear, the ascent of Adolf Hitler, a term many claim refers to Hitler, though it more likely refers to the Danube, and even the 9/11 attacks. However, there are hundreds of misses for every hit. Nostradamus never specifically predicted the 2 world wars. He didn't know about the internet, the moon landing, or the fall of the Berlin Wall. Many of the events attributed to him are the result of post hoc interpretation, a phenomenon where people read current or past events into vague language written centuries before. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias. We remember the hits and ignore the misses. Nostradamus himself warned readers not to take his predictions too literally. He frequently wrote in code, obscuring his meanings with anagrams, multilingual puns, and astrological references. His supporters claim that he did this to avoid being persecuted, while his critics claim that it is evidence of charlatanism. However, the ambiguity is exactly what keeps him so compelling. Nostradamus has taken on new cultural dimensions in the modern era. In addition to mystics and conspiracy theorists, populist leaders, doomsday preppers, YouTubers, and TikTok creators all draw inspiration from him. The Nazis turned Nostradamus predictions into weapons during World War II. Fake Nostradamus quatrains were commissioned by Hitler's chief propagandist Joseph Goebbels to suggest that the Führer's rise was divinely foretold. Allied forces responded in kind, crafting counter-prophecies to boost morale. Because of this, Nostradamus' ambiguous verses were used to alter public perception and morale, making him a psychological weapon. In more recent years, every global crisis, be it 9/11, COVID-19, climate change, or geopolitical instability, has been combed for possible Nostradamian analogues. Entire YouTube channels and social media accounts are dedicated to decoding his writings, sometimes with impressive effort, often with outlandish results. The year 2025, like others before it, is said to bring new catastrophes per Nostradamus. A long war, a plague resurgence, even a fireball from the sky. Whether symbolic or literal, these interpretations circulate rapidly online, stoking anxiety and fascination. So why do we still care? Why does a 16th-century French apothecary and astrologer continue to dominate our discussions about the end of the world? The answer lies in his poetic openness, not in the precision of his predictions. Nostradamus is a mirror. We see in him what we want to see. For some, he is a prophet. For others, a master of ambiguity. His verses serve as Rorschach tests onto which we project our fears and hopes. His staying power speaks to a broader human impulse, the yearning for foresight in a world that often feels chaotic and unknowable. We are story-driven creatures, and Nostradamus gave us stories about the future, written in a style mystical enough to transcend time and flexible enough to fit almost any context. Today, as climate change escalates, political systems falter, and technology advances at breakneck speed, people continue to search for meaning amid uncertainty. As a reminder that prophecy and the desire to believe in it are as old as civilization itself, Nostradamus provides a kind of ancient authority. His work lives at the intersection of literature, science, mysticism, and psychology. Whether you see him as a genius, a fraud, or a man simply reflecting the anxieties of his time, Nostradamus remains an enduring figure because he taps into the timeless human need to know what comes.